Hey guys, welcome back to Nioh. And yeah, this is a re-upload, but with a few changes. In the original video, I hadn't finished the DLC and didn't intend to, so I didn't include all the DLC bosses. But something about it really bothered me, so I pushed through and finished it. So this time I will include all the main DLC fights. Also, I'll rate each boss from 1 to 10. Keep in mind that unlike with most people nowadays, to me 5 is average. Anything above it is decent, so that should make you feel better about your school grades. Anyway, let's begin with the worst boss in the game. At the bottom of the list we have Honda Tadakatsu. I'll make this quick before I run out of footage, because this fight is really short. All you need to do is destroy the 3 crystals around the room. The objective is obvious and not hard to pull off. It's not a clever gimmick boss, and it's especially disappointing if you know who Honda is. He's supposedly one of the strongest warriors in all of Japan, and this is the boss fight that they came up for him. Pretty pathetic. For Honda I'll give 1.5 out of 10. It's shit. The second worst boss has to be the Great Centipede. This one's very gimmicky too, but in a different way. First you fight the centipede in its full size, then you cut it in half, then the cut off pieces will spread around the room. If you don't kill them quickly enough you'll get poisoned. Once they're dealt with, you face the rest of the centipede. And fighting it is garbage. It can go through its own body like it's nothing. It just feels buggy. No pun intended. And worst of all, I find it a boring fight. I'll give this one a 2 out of 10. The only reason it's ahead of Honda is because at least this one is an actual fight. Derrick the Executioner is next, and he's just a poorly done tutorial boss, I feel. He's too easy in comparison to even basic enemies in the same exact area to really be a proper introduction. Now, even though I say he's too easy, he can still one-shot you, which is also a bit absurd for a tutorial boss, but I guess it's best to get used to it from early on, since one-shots are a very commonplace in Nioh. There's not much to say about Derrick. Very bleh, but not absolute garbage. 3.5 out of 10. Fake Tachibana Mureshige is a pussy-ass bitch. It feels more like a Revenant fight than an actual boss fight, and considering he's actually Kelley in disguise, I would have expected him to use some cool dark magic, but instead he summons a cute puppy. Yeah, how threatening. And the boss is very easy, unlike the real Tachibana, which I won't be including on this list. I'll only include main mission bosses. That fight is definitely better than this one. This one is a 4 out of 10 for me. I'm sad to say that the next boss is Yamata-Ro-Orochi. I'm sad because the first time around I actually kind of enjoyed this fight, but I have to be honest, and this fight kind of sucks. First you fight one serpent and it's pretty whatever. You just dodge the attacks and wait for it to come close enough to hit it. Then next you have to fight 2 serpents at a time. The serpents are far away from each other, meaning if you focus on one of them you can't see what the other one is doing, so you can often get hit by projectiles coming off screen. But then once the 2 are dealt with, the roof comes off. What you do here is just bait for the serpents to hit the rocks and they get stunned. This lets you quickly dispose of them. But it's pretty lame, it's mostly just a waiting game. After all but one is defeated, the final stage will begin. It's not much different from the first phase, you just wait for it to come close enough so you can kill it. The only thing I really like about this fight is the spectacle. It has loads of it, and despite being fairly easy, it still got my hands sweaty for whatever reason. So I don't hate it. I'd give it 4 out of 10. Nioh, more like no. It's cool from a visual design, but when it comes to praises, that's where they end. Seriously though, look at that derpy face. I like it. But what's so bad about this fight is the lightning strike mechanic. Occasionally Nioh will roar, and that causes lightning to strike at the opposition multiple times. It's kind of a poor telegraph, I feel, and the attack itself forces you to run away from the fight, which I'm not a fan of. If you took away the lightning, I think this fight would be better. Nothing special, but not terrible. I do like how it has a weak spot in the belly and how it responds to you being behind it. For a rating, I'd give it 5 out of 10. Pretty average. Then we have Gasha-dokuro. Seeing this boss the first time had me scared. There was no way this game would make a boss fight against a thing that big fair. It's going to one-shot me just by looking at me. But to my surprise, this is actually a very fair fight. And of course, it's also a gimmick fight. I mean, it kinda had to be. There's no way you just hack at its ankles and kill it that way. Well, I guess you kind of do. First you have to damage the boss by either hitting its hands or legs. Then it gets knocked down and you get to wail on its head with a living weapon. Do that about twice and it's dead. and I fucking raped this boss. Hashtag me too. It's very easy once you know what to do, so I can't give it high praise. It's very standard. I'd say it's a 5 out of 10. Then at number, whatever number this is, we have Edward Kelley. If this was the final boss, I'd be super disappointed. But it's more like phase 1 to the actual final boss, which is actually disappointing. So keeping that in mind, they probably didn't want it to be too hard. They succeeded. It's not hard. But is it fun? I mean, yeah, kinda. For once it's not a samurai with a sword, but rather a spellcaster who can teleport around and throw a magical snake at you. Moveset wise, it's pretty cool. But this fight makes the main villain of the whole game seem like a bit of a pushover. Maybe that's intentional, I don't know. But as its own boss fight, there's not much to love. I'd give it 5 out of 10. Ormraki at first seemed like a pretty well designed beast boss, and maybe it is. In terms of moveset, it's mostly fine. I just really came to hate how it spams the spin attack that forces you away from it. And sometimes the boss spends way too long in the air. And then the health bar. My god! It's so big! The only way to make the fight short is by hitting its head when it's glowing, but I found it really hard to land a hit in time, as it only glows for a short period of time after specific attacks. The only way for me was by using the sloth spell that slows the boss down. So the fight ended up feeling really gimmicky. Also, why does it make elephant noises? What? Anyway, I still can't say it's a bad boss. I'd give it 5 out of 10 as well. Then we have Date Masamune. This boss is liked by a lot of people, but personally I think it's very bleh. At first the fight is alright, a bit of a glorified revenant fight, but it's not bad. Then he buffs up and becomes an absolute cuck. His speed is increased and he has infinite poise. All I was thinking during this phase was, when is it my turn to fight? He's too fast for me to really be able to keep up, so I just let him do his thing until his ki ran out. Then he changes to this weird ballsack head guardian spirit. And here you simply can't fight him. His attacks send out projectiles and can one-hit you if you're close. So your best bet is to just run around the room until his ki runs out. After that he switches back to the previous living weapon, and he repeats this cycle until he's dead. So after the initial phase you're barely given a chance to fight back. And I don't like that. Maybe if in between he switched back to not having a living weapon, this would be okay. But as it is, I think the fight is at best 5 out of 10. Then next is the other ballsack crushing boss in the same DLC, Lady Maria of the Astral Storeroom. At the beginning she's again pretty simple and not too hard. Though sometimes she does this instant grab without any warning whatsoever and one-shots you. And that feels a little bullshit. Once you've damaged her enough, she buffs up and gains infinite poise, just like Masamune. She also has these projectiles that I found extremely difficult to consistently dodge. Not a faulty design, just very unforgiving. And that's the thing with her. She's not really a badly designed fight, but I just don't find it fun. Even if it wasn't hard, I probably still wouldn't like it too much. There's nothing crazy cool about it. Just a sword fight in a storeroom. I'd say she's also 5 out of 10, but still slightly better than Masamune. I had a really weird experience with Sanada Yakimara. At first this boss just raped me for an entire hour. Then I changed my build and I raped him. Fighting Yakimara without a strong build was insanely hard. He barely leaves himself open after attacking. A single quick combo from him meant instant death for me. If my initial experience with him is how the fight was intended, I don't like it. I think it's too hard to be enjoyable for me. But maybe you're supposed to have a stronger build like mine in this footage here. I really can't tell. But even if so, I don't think it's great. His moveset is way too similar to Shima Sakon, an earlier boss. At least when he's using the fire buff anyway. At the end he changes to something more unique, but I didn't end up seeing that face very much. He was already pretty much dead. Then I should also mention the gang fight you have against him and his friend Sasuke in the final DLC. This is not a good duo fight. Their attacks aren't coordinated, and they don't take turns in fighting you. It's not well designed like Ornstein and Smough from Dark Souls, where one is fast and the other one is slow. So I don't really know how to rate this boss. I guess I'll just give him 5 out of 10 and place him here. Next is Chaos Bitch Quelag. Not gonna lie, nothing gets me more horny than the sight of a spider-assed woman. What? Don't judge me, we're in the kinky region. Anyway, this fight is okay. I don't really know too well how it works, because unfortunately, you don't need to know. The fight is so easy, you can kinda get away with just spamming, but I like the visual design. I like how she can cover up her spider ass to defend it. Her moveset seems cool. I just wish I had more of a reason to care about it. So this fight is pretty average. Now, originally I gave her 5 out of 10 and put her a fair bit lower, but I think the coolness factor of this fight puts it just a bit higher. So 5.5 out of 10. Umi-boza is next, and if you saw my original ranking, this may come as a surprise. I believe Umi-boza was one of my most hated bosses, like, ever, and yet this time I didn't mind the fight. And that's because on my first playthrough I did this fight wrong. I thought you're supposed to only attack his weak spots, the yellow glowing bits. But I'm dumb and failed to realize that the best tactic is to just go for its body at all times. With a fire buff you can dish out some insane damage without much opposition. I also kind of don't mind the torch mechanic in this fight. You can fight this boss almost right away after starting the level, but it's ill-advised as there will be several enemy spawns. You can prevent them from spawning by lighting all the torches in the area. This rewards you for fully exploring the area, which is kinda neat. I guess what I like the most about this fight is the visual design. It's a giant sea pickle. Mechanically it's very average though, so I wouldn't give it more than 5.5 out of 10. Then we have Saika Magotchi. This fight can get a tiny bit annoying with all the gun and bomb spamming, and he's pretty easy too. I was just about to beat him on my first try, but I felt bad about basically ignoring half the mechanics, so I let him kill me so I could redo the fight without leaving weapon. It was a good decision because doing this fight properly was pretty fun. Though with high stance Odachi I was able to knock him out of the air every time he flew, so it was pretty embarrassing for him. I also don't actually mind that the room is on fire. I thought I'd hate it, but having to actually mind your surroundings in a boss fight is rare, and it can be used against him. I think I'd give Magotchi like a 5.8 out of 10. Saratobi Sasuke is another DLC fight, and surprise surprise, I don't love it. He fights like a true ninja though, I'll give him that. He's super fast, spammy, and uses lots of tools, like buffs, throwing knives, and poisons. But personally I'm not a fan of status effects, such as poisons from bosses. They're just more annoying than anything else. But aside from that, the fight is pretty fair. I was just really relieved that he didn't have a living weapon buff that would give him infinite poise. I don't think I would have been able to handle that, but as it is I think it's a 6 out of 10. Hiro-erma is also heavy on status effects, namely paralysis. Not a huge fan of that. But despite that I think the fight is still decent. It's one of the harder main game bosses too. She's fast and aggressive and I like those types of fights. Well, usually anyway. I also like her umbrella. That's a pretty unique weapon. Not much else to say really. I'd give her 6.3 out of 10. Next is Ogress, and look at that fucking face! Ew! Anyway, on my first playthrough this fight was bugged. She refused to go into her second phase, and as a result I had an easy time with her. And well, I still did. That's the main problem I have with the fight. But at least I got to see her full moveset this time. And it's actually pretty cool. And she has a thing going for her that I found most bosses lacking. Atmosphere. I don't really know her story, I didn't pay attention, but the music, the look of the boss, the arena, all made me feel rather somber. And since the fight was chill, I got to focus more on that than on surviving. So for score I'd give her 6.5 out of 10. Okatsu would be higher if she was a little bit more durable. I found her way too easy on this playthrough, though I do remember her giving me a lot more trouble on my first playthrough. I remember trying to focus on trying to make her run out of ki, which she simply refused to do. Her ki replenishes quicker than most bosses I feel. As for her moveset, she ignores gravity. She jumps around, dashes through the air, uses cool martial arts. I like it. I just wish it was a bit harder. 6.5 out of 10 as well. Shima Sakon comes surprisingly high considering how much I hated this fight on my first playthrough. His intro cutscene was always cool though, and he retains his coolness in the fight itself. I just like his fighting style with the spear, especially when he tries to trip you up or shove you aside or headbutt you. But what made me hate this fight on my first playthrough was his very poorly telegraphed lightning attack. This attack barely has any wind up, but now that I was aware of it I was able to avoid it every time. Maybe having the Odachi helped as it gave me extra reach, so I could stay at a distance. So on this run I'd give Shima Sakon 6.5 out of 10, again. Dark Samurai is in an unfortunate place. My mood was sour when I was going into this fight, because out of all the main missions in the main game, this one was easily my least favorite. The whole level was claustrophobic, full of traps, and I kept getting lost in it. Didn't help that it was dark and hazy. But my mood was lifted when I finally started fighting the Dark or Obsidian Samurai. For some reason in some countries the name is changed. Is it out of concerns for racism or something? Just call it Samurai of Color. But the boss first seems pretty basic. He uses an axe and slams it around. Whoop-dee-doo. But then once you fought for a little bit, he changes to a katana. And this is what I enjoy about this fight. He can go from super slow to super fast, and it's a nice contrast in a fight. 6.5 out of 10. I know that may seem like a low score, but to me 5 is average, so this is definitely decent. Dato Shigezare has a very cool design, as you can see. He's like half centipede, half human. And I like the rhythm in this fight. You spin around him a lot, and it's fast, dangerous, and mostly fair. However, I don't like some of his one-shots, and especially this one flurry of attacks. You have to be ready for it long before the attack begins. If it wasn't for that, I could see Shigezare being one of my favorites. Still, I like how aggressive the boss is and how chaotic the fight feels, so I'll give him 6.5 out of 10. Look, 6.5 out of 10 is a good number. Don't be hating on it. Next we have the true tutorial boss of the game, Orryoki. I can't say I haven't gotten a little bit tired of seeing him though. They reuse him way too many times in the game, but I'd definitely rather see him being reused than, say, Great Centipede. Can you imagine? So Orryoki likes his balls, and I like them too. I like how he uses them to keep you away from him, punishing you for being overly greedy, but he still gives you a lot of openings. Once you cut off his balls, he definitely feels a bit neutered, oddly enough, but still pretty good. It's a standard fight, but I think it's a well-placed boss in the early game. And this boss was actually number 1 on my original list. Not because I loved the fight, but because I had no complaints. I still don't, but I do think some other bosses outclass him. So he's a 6.7 out of 10. Toyotomi Hideoyori seems like a good fight. It's from the DLC, but it reminds me more of some of the better main game bosses. Unlike some of the previous DLC fights, especially those closer to the bottom of the list, he gives you enough chances to fight back, so I feel like he's fairly designed. And it's not easy. However, my experience with Hideoyori ended very abruptly. I didn't get to see his final phase much because I just brute forced through it, so my experience with him could have been a bit better. But that's all very subjective, and a lot of how you view bosses depends on your build. I'd say my experience with him was like 6.8 out of 10. Otani Yoshitsuga is next, and he's a cool dude. He floats around, looks like a moth, and has some cool moves. Not terribly hard though, which is the main downside, but still not completely too easy. And despite being a humanoid, he does stand out from the typical samurai bosses. However, his combos aren't very different from the typical samurai bosses, so he doesn't stand out that much. So, not much else to say. He's pretty good. 6.8 out of 10. Next is Ishida Mitsurari, but his real name is Haircut. He gets stabbed in the back by Kelley and turns into a fearsome, deadly furry. Why did they give him a fucking foxtail? What? But aside from his visual design, I like the fight. He's one of the few to strike the right balance of difficulty for me. Not frustratingly hard, but also not laughably easy. There's some added flavors in the fight, such as the ceiling collapsing around you, and the boss collapsing. I felt kinda bad for the guy. He didn't seem like a bad dude. But then again, I didn't really follow the story. Maybe he's literally Asian Hitler. I don't know. But he also has some cool attacks to look out for, such as his grab and this flurry of projectiles. So I think Mitsunari is the first boss to reach 7 out of 10. Congratulations. Yaki-onna is pretty cool. I think she's the most liked boss in the game by far, and I can see why. She's fast-paced and well-balanced by her not having too much health. And it's all icy and shit, which makes it stand out visually quite a bit. But I don't think she's perfect. I don't really like her icicle projectiles. They often have very similar startup animations, but they require completely different reactions from you. Some are best avoided by running, some by dodging, and some by blocking. At least in my experience. But because the fight is so short, I don't mind it too much. It's not like a failed attempt cost me much time. And she's also a 7 out of 10 for me. Then next is the White Tiger. The design of the boss is really cool. It's a one-eyed cat monster with a giant tongue, wings, and 2 tails. That's pretty unique. The fight itself isn't anything too amazing, but not bad either, definitely not. The animations are all smooth and clear. It does what you'd expect mostly, claw attacks, tail swipes, but it also has this really nice looking backflip attack. And it's a bit of a sad fight too, which I like. The cat friend was like the only one consistently joining your adventures, so I wasn't happy about having to kill him, though he does come back later. Anyway, I'd give the fight a 7 out of 10 as well. Giant Toad has some very questionable hitboxes, and his spear charge can one-shot you, though quite a lot of bosses can do that. Aside from that though, I like it quite a bit. It's another cool looking boss. I like frogs, they get my seal of approval for existing. He first fights in a pretty standard way, swinging and poking with his spear, but then he starts using some ninjutsu moves, such as bombs and even using his cigar as a weapon. But still, I think it's a 7 out of 10 fight. There's nothing too fantastic about it, and the hitboxes bring it down a fair bit, but still a very fun fight. As the third best boss in Nioh, we have 100 Eyes. This was originally number 1, but a couple of things have changed the order a bit. But this boss really redeems the failure of Yamata-Ro-Orochi, as it's the true final boss of the main game. And this boss looks and even feels like it's taken from Bloodborne. And you all know how I love me some Bloodborne. This is also one of the few cases in Nioh where the boss struck the right balance of difficulty. It's difficult but fair, and his animations are so well telegraphed I was able to do this fight without remembering his moves. Just being reactionary was enough, but it was still an intense fight. At a certain point he summons eyes that shoot lasers. During this part he just sits on the ground, letting you deal with the eyes first. Then later during the fight he summons the eyes again, but this time keeps on fighting. This is good. He first gives you a warm-up for what's to come, so it won't be too overwhelming when it does. Plus his attacks are just cool to look at. I'd give the boss a 7.5 out of 10. The second best boss in the game is Oda Nobunaga. It's a very cool fight, I think. He can empower himself with several different living weapons, most of them being something you've seen before. It makes this feel like a climactic fight where all you fought before comes back at once. And I like how reactionarily you can do this fight. I didn't remember any of his moves too well, but just reacting to his animations was good enough. Which brings me to my one problem with this fight. This is motherfucking Oda Nobunaga, the most fearsome overlord in Japan. He should have been like the hardest boss in the main game, and yet that award probably goes to... Actually, I don't know. Yaki-onna, I guess. Still, I think the fight is really fun, and that's what matters most. I'd give this fight a 7.5 out of 10 as well. However, I placed it ahead of 100 Eyes because, honestly, while this isn't the best balanced fight in the main game, it is the most fun for me. But the best boss in the game for me is both fun and well balanced, and that's Nine-Tailed Fox. This is easily the coolest looking fight in the game, not just because of the look of the boss, but the arena is gorgeous as well, and I like the spell effects. You also get to fight alongside Sanada Yakimara. While he didn't make for a great boss, he makes for a good companion. And getting help in a boss fight is very rare. But what makes Nine-Tailed Fox the best in the game for me? Well, it's kind of hard to put it to words. I had a rough time in the DLC overall, and I wasn't expecting to finish it, let alone enjoy it by the end. I was close to beating this boss on my second try, but I decided to let it kill me because I wanted to keep fighting it, which only really happens to me with some of the better Soulsborne bosses. I just like fighting this boss, even though it has kind of an annoying tail swipe, but everything else is good. I think this fight is 8 out of 10. So that's the final form of this video. I really regret rushing this video at first without having completed the DLC. I hope you didn't mind rewatching this, and even more so I hope only now you're watching it for the first time. Anyway, let me know what's your favorite boss in the game, and thanks for watching. See ya!